the worst decisions of your life were probably not made carelessly. They were made confidently, with full information available. In a moment when you felt certain you understood the situation and acted accordingly. And only later, sometimes much later, did you realize that what felt like clear thinking was something else entirely, that the certainty you felt was not clarity. It was the absence of doubt. And the absence of doubt is not the same thing as the presence of wisdom. Most people believe their thinking is clearer than it is. Most people believe their judgment is more reliable than it is. And that gap between how clearly we believe we think and how clearly we actually think is responsible for more bad decisions, more broken relationships, more failed careers, more preventable disasters than almost any other single factor in human life. Today we go completely inside one of the most practically powerful books written about the mechanics of clear thinking and sound judgment, so completely, so thoroughly, that by the time this ends, you will not need to read a single page yourself. Every concept, every framework, every insight, right here. This is Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish, and nothing about how you understand your own mind, your decisions, or the gap between your intentions and your outcomes will feel the same after this. Shane Parrish is the founder of Farnam Street, one of the most widely read websites in the world about decision-making, mental models, and the art of thinking well. He spent years working in intelligence and cybersecurity before dedicating himself to studying and writing about how the best thinkers in the world actually think. Not the theories, not the academic frameworks, the actual cognitive habits and practices that distinguish people who consistently make good decisions from people who consistently do not. His central argument in this book is both humbling and actionable. Clear thinking is not a talent you are born with. It is not a fixed trait of intelligence or education or personality. It is a practice, a set of specific habits, specific disciplines, specific ways of engaging with information and uncertainty that can be learned, developed, and deliberately applied. And the absence of those habits, not stupidity, not ignorance, is what produces the vast majority of bad decisions that people make every day. This book is for you if you have ever made a decision that seemed right in the moment and revealed itself as wrong only in hindsight. This book is for you if you notice a gap between how good your intentions are and how good your outcomes are. And this book is for you if you want a rigorous, honest, immediately applicable framework for thinking more clearly, starting with the very next decision you face. If any of those land, stay with this. The first idea is the one that reframes everything about where bad decisions actually come from. Your defaults are running your life, and you did not choose them. Parrish opens with a distinction that is both obvious and overlooked. Human beings operate on two levels simultaneously: the deliberate, conscious, effortful level where we believe most of our important decisions are made, and the automatic, habitual, largely unconscious level where most of our decisions are actually made. And the automatic level is not neutral. It is loaded with defaults, behavioral patterns, emotional reactions, cognitive shortcuts that were shaped by biology, by upbringing, by experience, by the environments we have moved through, and that operate without our conscious awareness or permission. Parrish identifies 4 primary defaults that derail most people's thinking most of the time. The emotion default, reacting to situations based on how they make us feel rather than what they actually mean. The ego default, interpreting information through the lens of what protects our self-image rather than what is actually true. The social default, conforming to what the people around us think and do rather than forming independent judgment. And the inertia default, continuing what we have always done, because change requires effort, and effort requires energy. These four defaults are not character flaws. They are features of human psychology that served important functions in the environments where they were shaped. But in the complex, high-stakes, uncertainty-filled environments where most modern decisions are made, they produce systematic errors. And the first step to thinking more clearly is not learning new cognitive tools. It is recognizing when the defaults are operating and creating enough space between stimulus and response to make a choice. The practical question right now is, in the most important domain of your life where your outcomes are not matching your intentions, which of the four defaults is most likely operating? Emotion, ego, social, or inertia? Because naming the default does not eliminate it, but naming it is the prerequisite for choosing differently. The second idea is the one that provides the most important single tool for improving judgment. The space between stimulus and response is where wisdom lives. Parrish builds on Viktor Frankl's famous insight. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. But Parrish goes beyond the philosophical insight to the practical question. How do you actually create that space when the defaults are operating at full speed, when the emotion default is firing, when the ego is threatened, when the social pressure is immediate? He introduces what he calls the pause, not as a vague aspiration, but as a specific practice discipline. The deliberate insertion of time and distance between the moment a situation demands a response and the moment you actually respond. The discipline of not reacting immediately to the email that provokes you. The practice of sleeping on the decision that feels urgent. The habit of asking one clarifying question before forming an opinion. The pause works because it reduces the influence of the immediate emotional state on the response. The anger that felt overwhelming in the moment feels different an hour later. The certainty that felt unshakable in the conversation feels more nuanced after reflection. The decision that felt obvious under social pressure feels more complicated in solitude. Time does not guarantee better judgment, but it consistently reduces the dominance of the defaults that produce worse judgment. Parrish also talks about what he calls position-taking, the discipline of forming your own view before being exposed to others' views, before reading the analyst's recommendation, before hearing the group's opinion, before knowing what your mentor thinks. Because once you know what others believe, your evaluation of the evidence is systematically contaminated by the social default. You are no longer evaluating the evidence. You are evaluating whether to agree with the person. The third idea is the one that explains why intelligent people consistently fool themselves. Ego is the enemy of accurate thinking. Parrish dedicates significant attention to the ego default, the most intellectually dangerous of the four. Because the ego default does not feel like bias, it feels like confidence. It does not feel like self-protection. It feels like certainty. And the more intelligent the person, the more sophisticated the rationalizations the ego constructs to defend its preferred conclusions from inconvenient evidence. He introduces the concept of self-serving bias, the tendency to attribute successes to our own skill and failures to external circumstances. The investor who made money because they were smart and lost money because the market was irrational. The manager whose team succeeded because of their leadership and failed because of their team's effort. In each case, the evidence is being filtered through the lens of self-protection rather than evaluated honestly. The antidote Parrish proposes is what he calls accurate self-assessment. Not harsh self-criticism, not false modesty, accurate. The discipline of evaluating your own performance with the same rigor and honesty you would apply to someone else's. Asking not, was I smart, but was I right? Not did I work hard, but did the approach work? Not whose fault was it, but what actually happened. This discipline is genuinely difficult. Because accurate self-assessment requires tolerating a level of uncertainty about your own competence that the ego finds deeply uncomfortable. But the person who can do it consistently has access to feedback that most people never receive, because most people are too busy defending their self-image to learn from their experience. The fourth idea is the one that provides the most practical framework for making better decisions immediately. Define the problem before you solve it. Parrish argues that the single most common source of poor decisions is not poor reasoning about the right question. It is excellent reasoning about the wrong one. The problem gets defined too quickly, too narrowly, too much in the terms that make a preferred solution look obvious. And then all the cognitive energy goes into justifying that solution rather than examining whether the problem was framed correctly. He introduces a discipline he calls problem definition. The practice of spending as much time on defining the problem clearly as on solving it. Asking not just what solution should I choose, but what problem am I actually trying to solve? Not just what options do I have, but what outcome would genuinely constitute success? Not just what is the fastest path forward, but what are the second and third order consequences of each option? Parrish uses the example of someone who comes to a decision about whether to fire an employee. The instinctive framing is binary, keep or let go. But the clearer framing asks what outcome would success actually look like here? Is the issue performance, fit, behavior, or something in the management system? Each of those definitions points to a different solution, and solving the wrong problem, however brilliantly, produces the wrong outcome. Before your next significant decision, write down the problem you are trying to solve in one clear sentence. Then ask whether that sentence is actually the right framing, whether there is a broader or narrower definition that would be more accurate, whether the solution you are already leaning toward has shaped the way you defined the problem. The fifth idea is the one that separates good thinkers from great ones. Build a personal board of directors. Inside your head. Parrish introduces one of the most practically powerful mental models in the book. The concept of building an imaginary council of advisors, drawn from history, from literature, from the people you most respect, whose perspective you can consult on important decisions. Not literally, as a cognitive discipline. The practice of asking not just, what do I think, but what would this specific person think, whose judgment I respect, whose perspective is different from mine, whose values I want to embody. Charlie Munger famously kept a mental model of Benjamin Franklin as one of his primary thinking partners. He would ask himself what Franklin would think about a given decision, and find that the exercise surfaced considerations he would not have reached through his own thinking alone, not because Franklin was present, because the discipline of taking another perspective seriously, even an imagined one, forces a kind of intellectual humility that solo thinking rarely produces. Parrish also introduces the concept of second-order thinking, the discipline of asking not just what are the immediate consequences of this decision, but what are the consequences of those consequences? Not just what happens next, but what happens after what happens next. Most people think to the first order and stop. The decisions that go badly are almost always the ones where the second-order consequences were predictable, but nobody looked. What would happen if you applied second-order thinking to the most important decision currently in front of you? What are the consequences of the consequences? And does that change what the right answer is? The sixth idea is the one that makes everything lasting. Build your environment before your willpower fails. Parrish closes with an argument that ties directly to what we learned in Atomic Habits and Essentialism. The most reliable path to consistently clear thinking is not trying harder to think clearly. It is building the conditions in which clear thinking naturally emerges, reducing the cognitive load that depletes the mental resources available for deliberate reasoning, creating physical and social environments that support good judgment rather than undermining it, building routines that produce the rest, the clarity, and the psychological safety that good thinking requires. He identifies specific high-leverage environmental changes that consistently improve decision quality. Regular sleep, the single highest impact variable in cognitive performance. Physical movement that reduces the cortisol that degrades judgment. Reduced decision fatigue through batching routine choices and creating strong defaults. The deliberate cultivation of relationships with people who value honest thinking over comfortable agreement. None of these changes require exceptional willpower or unusual discipline. They require design. The same design principle that powers every other system we have discussed in this series, and the person who designs their environment for clear thinking will consistently outthink the person who relies on willpower to overcome an environment designed against them. Clear thinking requires clear conditions. Build them. Now, the honest warning. Reading about the 4 defaults will not stop them from operating the next time you face a high-stakes decision. Understanding the ego default will not prevent you from rationalizing the conclusion your ego has already reached. Watching this video will not build the pause discipline that creates space between stimulus and response. Only practice will. Only the daily, deliberate, sometimes frustrating work of noticing when the defaults are operating, creating the pause, defining the problem before solving it, and building the environment that makes clear thinking the path of least resistance. Think clearly, starting now. Here are your 4 action steps this week. Step 1. Identify your dominant default. Of the 4, emotion, ego, social, inertia, which one most consistently derails your thinking in high-stakes situations? Write one recent example where it operated. Be specific. Be honest. Step 2. Practice the pause on one decision this week. One situation where your instinct is to react immediately and you deliberately wait. 1 hour. 1 day. And notice what changes about your assessment when the immediate emotional charge has reduced. Step 3. Define one current problem clearly. Write it in one sentence. Then ask whether that sentence is actually the right framing. Whether the solution you are already leaning toward has shaped the problem definition. Step 4. Apply second-order thinking to your most important current decision. What are the consequences of the consequences? What happens after what happens next? Write 2 levels of consequences and see if the right answer changes. Let us bring this home. Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish is not a book about intelligence. It is a book about discipline, about the specific, learnable, daily practice of recognizing when your defaults are running your decisions and creating enough space to choose differently. It teaches you that the worst decisions are almost never made carelessly. They are made confidently by people who believed they were thinking clearly when they were actually thinking automatically. And that the gap between those two things, between automatic and deliberate, between default and chosen is where the quality of your decisions is actually determined. So let me leave you with one question. Think about the most important decision currently in front of you. Which of the four defaults, emotion, ego, social, inertia, is most influencing how you are currently framing it? Drop a comment below and tell me which idea hit you hardest. Was it the four defaults, the ego as the enemy of accurate thinking, or the discipline of defining the problem before you solve it? I read every single one, and if you are not subscribed, do that now, because next week we go even deeper. I will see you there.